They were doctors, lawyers, teachers, and engineers. They were people with college degrees, stable jobs, and close families. Some were described by friends as the smartest people they knew. Within 2 years, they had given up their careers, cut off their families, handed over their savings, and were following every instruction from a single person they'd come to call their teacher, their guide, their God. This is not a story about weakness. This is a story about technique. The word cult carries a specific image: robes, isolated compounds, charismatic madmen. But that image is a defense mechanism. It lets us believe we'd see it coming. The psychological research on cults consistently reveals something far more disturbing. The most effective mind control techniques work precisely because they don't look like mind control. They look like love. They look like community. They look like belonging. Robert J. Lifton is the psychiatrist who first systematically documented thought reform techniques after studying Chinese re-education camps in the 1950s. His landmark book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, published in 1961, identified 8 specific criteria that define environments capable of dismantling a person's identity and replacing it with a new one. Those same criteria appear, with remarkable consistency, in every documented high-control group since. The process almost always begins the same way. A person is going through a transition, a job loss, a breakup, a move to a new city, a period of grief. They're not broken. They're simply open. And that openness is the first vulnerability a high-control group will exploit. Recruitment doesn't happen in dark alleyways. It happens at seminars, yoga classes, online forums, and dinner parties. It begins with a conversation that feels unusually warm. The technique is called love bombing, and it is alarmingly effective. New recruits are showered with attention, affection, and validation. Everyone seems delighted to meet them. They're invited to dinners, events, and retreats. Phone calls come throughout the week just to check in, just to say they were thinking of them. For someone who's lonely or searching, this feels like finally finding their people. Neurologically, love bombing triggers the same reward circuits as falling in love. Here's what makes this particularly effective: by the time the demands begin, the recruit has already made multiple small commitments. They attended a meeting. Then another. They shared personal struggles with the group. They perhaps gave a small donation. Each step felt natural and voluntary. But each step also created what psychologist Robert Cialdini calls commitment and consistency, a psychological drive to remain aligned with your previous choices. Once initial trust is established, language begins to shift. High-control groups develop their own vocabulary, specialized terms that only insiders understand. Lifton called this loading the language. When a group controls the words you use to think, it controls what thoughts are available to you. Concepts that challenge the group become literally harder to articulate internally. The language doesn't just describe reality, it constrains it. Simultaneously, the group begins what researchers call thought-stopping techniques. These are practices, often presented as meditation, prayer, or mantras, that interrupt critical thinking when doubt arises. The moment a member begins to question leadership or doctrine, they're instructed to repeat a phrase, visualize an image, or engage in a physical ritual that breaks the chain of critical thought. The doubt doesn't get examined. It gets interrupted. Social isolation is the next critical mechanism. It rarely happens abruptly. Instead, the group gradually increases its demands on time and energy until members have little capacity for outside relationships. Former friends and family who express concern are reframed as spiritually dangerous, jealous, or agents of darkness. This framing serves a double purpose: it severs support networks and creates an us versus them identity that strengthens in-group bonds. The NXIVM organization, led by Keith Raniere and exposed in 2017, used a specific isolation technique, requiring members to report every hour they spent with non-members. They called non-members suppressives. Members were encouraged to keep enrollment coaches, essentially accountability partners who monitored their commitment to group values. The result was a surveillance system built by the members themselves, targeting their own autonomy. Confession rituals are another near-universal feature. Members are encouraged, sometimes required, to share their most private failures, fears, and transgressions with leadership or the group. This serves multiple psychological functions. It creates genuine vulnerability and intimacy, binding the person to the group. It also creates a covert threat, leave, and that private information may be weaponized. In some groups, confessions are literally recorded and stored. One of Lifton's most important observations concerns what he called the demand for purity. High control groups divide the world absolutely. There is the path of light, which is the group, and everything outside, which is contaminated. This binary thinking eliminates nuance. Questions become evidence of weakness or spiritual failure. Doubt is reframed not as healthy skepticism but as a symptom of corruption that must be overcome through greater devotion. Perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated technique is called incremental escalation. A former member of Heaven's Gate, the group whose 39 members died in a mass suicide in 1997, described the process this way: each step seemed like a small logical extension of the one before it. Give up television. Then music. Then physical intimacy. Then contact with family. Then your possessions. By the time you're asked for something truly extraordinary, your baseline for normal has shifted completely. The psych term for this is the boiling frog principle. The incremental nature of the changes prevents the alarm system from triggering. Former cult members almost universally described the same retrospective experience. Looking back, no single moment felt like the moment they crossed a line. Every moment felt like a small, reasonable continuation of what came before. The line moved with them. Cult researchers like Janja Lalick have identified that many victims score high on intellectual curiosity and idealism, not low. These individuals are drawn to groups offering grand answers to grand questions: the meaning of existence, the structure of reality, the path to enlightenment or justice. Their willingness to commit deeply to ideas is a strength that gets turned against them. Cults don't exploit stupidity. They exploit sincerity. When members do begin to have doubts, and most eventually do, the group's internal architecture makes those doubts functionally inexpressible. Who do you talk to? Every person you trust is in the group. The outside world has been framed as dangerous or inferior. Your own internal dialogue may be suppressed through thought stopping. You've been taught that doubt itself is a spiritual failing. The exit is locked from the inside. Exit costs are also deliberately inflated. In Nexium, members who had risen in rank had often recruited friends and family into the group. Leaving meant acknowledging that you had brought others into something harmful. Former members of Scientology described spending years before departure calculating the social cost, losing every friendship they'd made over decades. The more integrated the group has become with your identity, the more leaving feels like dying. Cult recovery is its own complex psychological process. Researchers have documented what's called a floating phenomenon, where former members experience intrusive memories and automatic emotional responses to group triggers for years after leaving. Therapists who specialize in cult recovery report that the deeper challenge isn't deprogramming specific beliefs. It's rebuilding the capacity to trust one's own judgment, a capacity the group systematically dismantled. What protects people from cult recruitment? The research points to a few consistent factors: strong, diverse social networks that aren't easily replaced, comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity, the ability to hold open questions without needing immediate answers, and prior education in persuasion techniques and social influence. Knowing the playbook makes it harder to be played. Vulnerability isn't destiny, but ignorance of the mechanisms is. It's worth sitting with a specific fact. Researchers estimate that between 2 and 5 million Americans have been involved with a cult or high control group at some point in their lives. These are not fringe statistics from fringe populations. These are teachers, nurses, engineers, and neighbors. The scale of these organizations, and their success in operating across educational and socioeconomic lines, should fundamentally change how we talk about them. The techniques documented by Lifton in 1961, milieu control, loading the language, thought stopping, confession, demand for purity, incremental escalation, have not disappeared. They've migrated. They appear in corporate cultures with totalistic value systems. They appear in certain online communities that insist on absolute ideological conformity. They appear in extremist political movements that demand the severing of ties with those who think differently. The term cult doesn't require robes or a compound. It requires a closed information environment, a leader or doctrine placed beyond critique, social pressure to conform, and penalties for questioning. When you encounter a group of any kind, in any domain, that exhibits these features, the psychological mechanisms described here are not absent simply because the setting is modern or respectable. The technology of belief manipulation is ancient and portable. Understanding how cults work is not about feeling superior to those who got caught. The research is clear: the techniques work on ordinary, intelligent, caring people. The most effective protection isn't intelligence or strength, it's awareness. It's knowing that love bombing is a technique before someone uses it on you. It's knowing that thought stopping exists before someone teaches it to you as meditation. Knowledge here isn't just academic. It's a shield. The human need for belonging, for meaning, for certainty in an uncertain world, these are not weaknesses. They're fundamental features of being human. Cults don't exploit broken people. They exploit human nature with surgical precision. And until we treat that exploitation as the serious, systematic, documented threat that researchers have proven it to be, we will continue to be surprised when the next charismatic leader emerges and the next wave of intelligent, ordinary people follows.